Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the REFSIX Weekly. Today it's just myself and John. We are basically going to talk about everything to do with the European Super League and the ramifications that could have happened from if it were to go ahead. We really want to focus on refereeing because no one's even thought about who could have refereed it. It looks like it's not going to happen anymore, which is fantastic news. But we wanted to play out some of the scenarios should it have gone through. But the first thing we want to talk about in terms of news, other than that, in the refereeing world, is the PGMOL have now taken over the responsibility for the officials for the Women's Super League and Women's Championship, which is going to be great for the women's game to be able to kind of get all of that extra resource that the PGMOL will be able to provide, and probably opens the door for full-time positions at some point. It's much more likely that full-time positions on the Women's Super League would happen under the PGMOL remit rather than the FA. So that's big news. And for those officials who officiate on the women's pyramid, I'm sure they're all excited by that. But John, yeah, major news everywhere. And it's been basically, I've not seen anywhere near as much news around football than I have in the last 3 days. Even people that don't really like football have been interested in the story, I guess, and learning a lot about it. But what were your initial reactions? So just really quickly to the people watching and listening, you would have heard it. The European Super League, 12 of the biggest clubs in Europe banded together to create their own league that would have pulled them out of Champions League and Europa League, Arsenal and Spurs Europa League stuff, and would have had this new midweek European Super League. It got a horrendous amount of kind of a disdain from UEFA, from FIFA, from Premier League, all the leagues around the world, basically, or all the leagues that were affected. Fan power was prevalent, and basically 9 of those 12 teams have now pulled out. And probably by the time this actually goes to out there and you're listening to it, it might have been all 12 have come out. But John, you're a Liverpool fan, so your team were in this in the ESL. What was your thoughts when you heard the news?
Well, was it Sunday night the rumours started flying around? And I know they've been talking about this for a while. So I was the rumour mill starts again. And then it started gaining traction. And then Liverpool put out such a generic statement. Like, as a Liverpool fan, I was like, this doesn't sit quite right. Like, we've only just won the Champions League. We've only just won the Premier League for the first time. And we seem to be binning it off. In terms of, like, when you look deeper into it, like, no one really cared about all the Liverpool fans or all the Chelsea fans. Like, no one really, the owners didn't care. It just seemed that the only thing that was flying around was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's hard to accept. And, had it not gone through, I probably would have gone back to supporting Pompey.
Mm-hmm.
And, it would be hard to support. I don't think there would have been a club to support. It would be more like a franchise after that. I think that's the way that it looked like it was going.
Yeah, very much kind of born out of the American model in the MLS, NFL, NBA, where there is no relegation, there is no real punishment or punishment for poor performance, but also not got the excitement of the ability for a team from nowhere to come up through the ranks. No Leicester winning the Premier League, etc. But most people would have listened to others pundits talk about this. We're nowhere near as qualified as some of the elite players to talk about specifics around this. But one thing that we've been thinking about all week was talking about refereeing, because as UEFA and FIFA stated, that one of the punishments could have been for the players that they wouldn't have been able to do any international games, for example. They wouldn't have been able to play in the World Cup, in the Euro Championships. And instantly in my head, that would have been the same for referees too. So I've been thinking about who could or who would want to go and referee this tournament. So before I start, John, you've obviously been thinking the same thing. Like, what were the ideas in your head?
Well, originally, had this happened 2 or 3 years ago, this is prime Clattenburg, isn't it? You know, he's fallen out with the FA. You know, he's gone to Saudi Arabia. Like,
Mhm.
this is prime Clattenburg. But then again, it would have been the same for Webb as well. He retired on a high. Could he have just gone? He's gone to America now.
Mhm.
But I've actually just thought about it. Potentially, is it Bobby Madley,
Yeah.
who's currently circulating in and around the
Definitely.
the football league? You know, he's having to work to get back to his FIFA badge, but he's already got it. So if
Mhm.
they offered him enough money to sort of, you know, do the big games again,
Yeah.
this is that sort of prime example is for people in England. Then you've also got like Bjorn Kuipers, who's probably coming towards the back end of his refereeing the elite game again.
Mhm.
So, you know, end on a high, it's probably a fair wedge of a paycheck
Yeah.
for him. Why not go out?
I think the assumption is that the money for refereeing those games would be a lot higher than anywhere else on a per game basis. Um, as I thought about it, I don't think no. I've met Bobby. I wouldn't claim to know him very well, but I I don't I don't think he would.
That's fine.
But it's a good point. Your idea is correct. Like in my head, if you're looking at the English referees, and we've said a few times on this podcast, the two probably most uh, adored is definitely the wrong word by fans, but most thought of as the two elite, and obviously are by UEFA and FIFA, is Michael Oliver and Andy Taylor. If you're any referee coming through the pyramid who's worked years and years to get to the Premier League, to get the FIFA badge, your dream is World Cup. Like
Yeah,
there is no doubt. So Michael Oliver and Andy Taylor would I unless it's like a ridiculous amount of money per game, I just couldn't see either of those two referees going, and anyone of that ilk, right? Anyone who's young, who's at the elite level, who is aspiring to be in a Champions League final, a World Cup final, doesn't sit right that they want to consider it. Then I started thinking about, well, maybe in similar to your thoughts about Clattenburg and Webb, maybe some of the referees who are in their twilight of their career, so your Mike Deans, your Martin Atkinsons, maybe they would consider doing something like that. But again, who knows? I don't think I would. You can't say anything to anyone if they're going to get a little bit more money, that's fine, fair enough. They should at that stage, right? And then I started thinking a bit further afield, and um, I don't think I think my statement around Michael Oliver and Andy Taylor applies in other countries, right? So your Clement Turpin, your all of these referees in Europe who are up and coming, who haven't had a final yet, who are aspiring to get there, I don't think would be anywhere. They wouldn't want to do it. But then again, to your point, Kuipers or referees who've had some of the top finals or in their last maybe couple years, it would be a great position to be in. And then the only other people I could think about who could be interested are the up and coming referees, but in maybe smaller countries. So, like the Romanian Hatigan,
yeah,
um, like well, Turkey's probably not. Turkey's still got a great standard of football, but there are some other Victor Kasai when he was at Hungary. So some of these smaller footballing nations, the referees there may be really interested in going out, especially if they're not full time referees themselves, right? If they could
yeah.
all of a sudden make a living from it, I think that's an interesting approach. But no one seemed to talk about refereeing. The only thing that I saw was mentioned was Fiorentino Perez, the I think he's the chairman or the president of Real Madrid, who was the chairman of the ESL, basically said we're going to go and get the best referees. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I just didn't. No, you're not. Unless you're going to pay them obscene amounts of money, they wouldn't have come. I really
No.
don't think. So that's one. But then they started to talk about really interesting things like we're going to mic up all the referees. So now you need definitely fluent English speakers if you want to, because this is all about TV. You want to get that going everywhere. And it got me thinking that actually, because it's a whole new tournament that they're creating, it will sit outside of FIFA jurisdiction, IFAB laws of the game.
Yeah.
They could do whatever they want in terms of rules and laws. So if they don't like offside, they could have changed it completely from the rest of the world. If they wanted to change the back pass or handball,
But
etc.
they were talking about changing the games for shorter periods of time, weren't they? So
Yeah,
reducing the length of the game. So yeah, they were planning on almost throwing out every rule book and just been like, yeah, we can start again if we want.
yeah, which is it's funny because there was talk that younger people want shorter games, but this was 12 clubs, probably, I'm safe to say, fairly older gentlemen making these decisions. Not once did they speak to fans or even did any sort of like trying to gather insights. They've looked at some numbers and they believe they know what they're talking about, but it's just not the way businesses run anymore. The one other interesting thing that I thought would be cool to talk about is VAR and goal line technology in the ESL, right? So again, Hawkeye is the prime or the primary kind of um, supplier
Right.
supplier of goal line and supplier of VAR. If the ESL came knocking on Hawkeye's door, um, I think they would have to say no because FIFA rubber stamp who the providers are. If Hawkeye went and worked in the ESL, FIFA could say, Hawkeye, sorry, we're going to take away your license now, and it would have ruined their business. So that would have been interesting to see I would have liked, it to stay on a little bit, like another week or so we could have seen what their thoughts and plans would have been around
Yeah.
all of this. Because it seems fairly, even though the rumors have been around for ages, it seems fairly not well thought through
Yeah.
from
No.
any aspect, right? So
On a money making scheme, it works. Like
yeah,
for a business, it would have worked really well had it been a business. But for a football club, it hasn't worked because
yeah,
there are too many variables that the whole football community came together to basically backlash this.
yeah. And it was great to see like fans from all different clubs, rival clubs, come together against it. The Chelsea fans outside protesting last night, which is great to see. It's kind of united fans against these billionaire boys club. So it kind of gets me on to how does football solve this issue? Because it seems like the clubs have run home with their tail between their legs. What's the what's the ramifications? Do you think like the Premier League should be doing anything about it in terms of points deduction, in terms of a ban? And there was talk of a ban, but maybe not now. What are your thoughts on that?
I think like Liverpool don't need a points deduction. They've been rubbish anyway. They're doing that themselves. But for Chelsea, City, and Real Madrid, they're going to be sweating out, aren't they? Because they've got City are on course to potentially win their first ever Champions League. Chelsea winning it first time since 2012. That's a big deal for them. And if it goes Pete Tong, then why not make them sweat and
Do you
say,
think
look,
do you think they should do it? Is probably the question because it's obviously punishing the players. It's going to punish the fans for decisions of very few associated with the club.
yeah, and I think that's the big thing. The players never seem to say, or they've all said that they didn't want it. But I generally think the fans would accept it at this moment in time. Like you talk about how many, like Gary Neville was like, yeah, relegate Man United, and he's the biggest Man United fan I've ever met, well, not met, but seen. And he's like, relegate us.
Yeah.
Like I think the fans will accept whatever punishment comes their way. Yeah, it's disappointing for the players, but you live and die by your employers.
And if you think about, you mentioned Portsmouth earlier, but if you think about owners in the past that have run the clubs poorly, they have incurred points deduction, right? So it's not the same. It's just financially they've run it poorly. They've gone into administration that has impacted the points on the board and the players and the fans. So maybe maybe there should be some ramifications. It'll be really interesting to hear what our listeners and viewers think of that. So give us a comment, give us a tweet about that. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are and who you think would referee. Which referees do you think would be the ones that are we wrong? Do you think Michael Oliver and Anthony Taylor would be people that would be picked, or do you agree with our stance on which referees? in terms of solution, though, John, like there's a big problem, right? And it feels crazy. It feels like the last 3 days feel a bit of an emotional roller coaster for everyone, every fan, right? It's not new. You know, the Premier League, you could go back to the Premier League and the founding of the Premier League and say, well, it was kind of similar. Obviously, they still had relegation and promotion. But what are the solutions to this? Like, it seems like, and everyone's talking about is money orientated, right? The
Yeah.
problem is the biggest cost or the biggest expense in a football club is the salaries of the players. So surely a salary cap is needed now, right? It happens in other sports. It's happening in League One and League Two soon. It's going to happen in the MLS, or I think it already happens in the MLS. So like, why are we not considering a European level salary cap on all the leagues? It has to be that way because if you just do it in England, then all the best players are going to go to France or to Spain. But if we did a European level, surely that's the right solution, or a part of the right solution.
Yeah, well, they did this. It happened with English clubs because obviously the Premier League is the most televised league in the world, isn't it? It happened when English clubs were playing premiums on foreign players, and they brought in a rule to stop that because obviously the problem is that the more money there is in the game, you know, with the more sponsors, like is it Hublo's just sponsored the timekeeping of the Premier League. You know, they've taken away a title sponsor.
Yeah, Cadbury's, McDonald's, etc. Yeah,
there's so much money floating around. At some point, it's going to be like, well, we've got it all. What more do you want us to do with it? We can't just keep making, like, the clubs are technically reinvesting the money in players and contracts.
Yeah.
But that is the problem. Like, the more money this brings in, the more money there is for them to spend. Rugby don't have that kind of, you know, exposure. So they have to keep a salary cap there to keep the clubs alive.
Yeah.
Similarly with the MLS, like that's only recently been a thing because they don't have that sort of.
But John, you say all of this, and the thing that Fiorentino Perez said is like between the 12 clubs, they've lost, I don't know if it was hundreds of millions or even billions, right? So even though this money's coming in, they're not spending it wisely, right? It's, you know, even the biggest clubs are making losses. So I really think a salary cap is one part. And then the second part, I think, is the German model, where, and I don't know if 51% is needed, but I definitely think fan kind of ownership or fan representation on the board is another step in the right direction, right? I don't think there is a sweeping brush that can make this all disappear. I think there's a load of big steps that need to happen, and I think those are two. What about you? Like, what are your thoughts? Because obviously the Champions League, under all of this, the Champions League has had a change this week, which is going to lead to some really interesting changes, I think, in 2024. But yeah, is there just too much football? Is that the issue? Like, do we just need to go back to, you know, the Cup Winners' Cup? That's what it used to be, or the cup where only the league winners play in it for Europe, or, you know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but that's equivalently the Super League, isn't it? That's bringing back the Super League idea. And I don't think this Super League idea is dead. I think there will be, you know, a rebirth of it at some point. I think we've got to prepare for that. And yeah, I think bringing ownership back to the fans, like Germans do it, they seem to have a great idea. Like, I love listening about German football. You know, they keep their ticket prices cheap because, you know, they want the fans to go. Their atmosphere is always great. You never really hear of any issues in Germany about, you know, clubs going under or, you know, poorly run clubs. So yeah, why not bring it in like Germany, like model it in Germany?
And in fact, they hate the model, the Red Bull model, right? That's really, you know, so yeah, it is really interesting. I think there's a lot more to come on this. It seems like the trains come off the track, but you might be right. It might get back on. It might be able to jump back on in the future. But I think the key thing, if the clubs are going to look at this, is they need to plan better and they need to be more transparent and speak to the fact that the players and managers haven't heard about any of it is crazy too.
Yeah.
But so that was our little discussion around the European Super League. we thought it was important to touch on it, but also talk about from a refereeing perspective, what they were thinking about referees and who we thought could potentially do it if they tried. I think the one benefit could have been, the only benefit I could see in refereeing is if some of the elite referees did move on, especially those who are in the, like I said, the twilight of their career, it could bring some of the younger referees from the championship through and accelerate their career a little bit better. That's probably the only positive I could have seen in a refereeing standpoint. And and like you said, you know, it would be cool to be able to see at an elite level a tournament with that's kind of innovative in terms of trying new laws, right? A lot of the new laws get done or get trialed at lower levels and things like that. So that would have been pretty interesting. But I'm, you know, don't get me wrong, anyone watching or listening, I was dead against the whole thing in the first place. But yeah, it's a strange one, and hopefully we've seen the end of it, but we're not sure. But thanks for everyone for listening. It was a short and sweet one. But if you, let us know what your thoughts are, especially around the refereeing. Maybe what law changes you thought, you know, that you would like to see that they may have tried, etc. Just let us know in the comments on YouTube or tweet us at REFSIX. Cheers, John, and for everyone, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.